Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Weiner Wellness Virtual Summit. I have a very special guest here with me today. Robert Scott Bell of the Robert Scott Bell Show is here to share his knowledge and experience on the indoctrination pathway and how we got here. So I know, Robert, we were in April. We were together at a professional training event, and you did such a great job just breaking down, how did we get to this point? The history, all of the belief systems that go along with it. And as much as you and I talk about it, and as much as you talk about it 6 days a week on your show, right, which everyone needs to tune into, I don't think people know. I don't think they realize how we got here. So I'm really grateful that you're here today to share some of that experience and knowledge with us.
Well, thank you, Tracy. I think about my life's journey thus far, and a big part of it has been transiting through what I thought was real about history and how I got where I was, and then ask the bigger how we all got here. And I always felt that the story I was being told was not complete. That's a really kind and gentle and loving way to say it. In a more direct way, you wake up and you say, my gosh, they lied to me. They all lied to me. I'm thinking in my journey specifically, went through a kind of a narrow path of modern medicine, being medically grown, raised, pharmaceutical family. My dad was in the pharmaceutical industry. My uncle, his brother, was a medical doctor, and always having the perception from the time I could remember as a little tyke growing up and saying, I'm going to be a doctor. I'm going to be a doctor. Now, it was really my request, my petition, my sense of my mission was to be a healer. And that word was sort of interchangeable. But growing up in America, the only let's say, definition of a healer would be a doctor, unless you learned other historical paths on other forms of medicine, which I really didn't know anything about. And when I, had gone through 19 or so years of medical suppressive treatments for the many ailments and illnesses that I suffered from really the time I was born, it took all of that to finally wake me up to say, this is not the right path for me. As I was, in a pre-med program at a major, egghead university in the South, and recognized that if I was to do all the things that were done to me as a doctor, I would be miserable to other people. And it was a disillusionment moment, but I've shared that my uncle, the medical doctor, who's no longer with us, he died of cancer, or ultimately treatment of cancer. He was, and funny enough, I say funny enough now, I mean, he was a X-ray nuclear medicine specialist. He survived being a medic and doctor in Vietnam, and lived a life. He really cared about people, but he warned me when I was a young teenager to not go into medicine. My uncle, the doctor, he said, don't go into it because you'll be miserable. He knew my spirit before I knew, I believe, as he was warning me about it. I just like, okay, Uncle Bob, whatever, but yeah, it's just what I want to do. And there was that wake up some years later when I realized, my gosh, they are poisoning me. Every bit of everything that doctors have ever done to me, whether vaccinations or antibiotics or any number of drugs for musculoskeletal inflammatory diseases, conditions, as well as numerous infections, allergies galore, respiratory issues, skin conditions, you name it, I had it. Everything that they had was poison. Now, I didn't know it. It was just like, okay, take another drug, take another shot. And so it took a lot of suffering, a lot of symptom suppression and management before I believe the spirit woke me up, because I prayed to God all the time. God, please help me. I'm suffering here. I've got every ailment and illness. I'm like an old man in a young person's body. What's going on? And it took that suffering to kind of drive me to learn first and foremost, and Tracy, I know we've talked about this, spiritual principles, really deep level, what runs the universe? What is life all about stuff? To where I could apply those same principles that I understood, for spiritual health to my physical body, mental, emotional, and everything else. So it was a number of years at that point where I woke up and said, you know what, I can't do this doctoring. I would be miserable. My uncle was right. And it was a lot of hard work in getting grounded, believe it or not, saying this, grounded in spiritual principles. Yes, that's true. That's real. That happens. That can happen. It really has to happen. That I was then able to apply those same principles to my body. And that opened me up to receive forms of medicine or healing that I had never heard of, or that sounded weird and strange, like homeopathic medicine at the age of
Right.
24 when I met a homeopathic doctor that would become a mentor to me, and I studied with for 10 years plus. And uh, these are the actual journeys, Tracy, nothing less than that. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the quotes that I show a lot of times, these pictures, these images, like cartoon images of me that one of my friends who's a fan of the show sends. And I said, the most important role, or what our role is as a healer or a doctor, as a teacher, is really to reconnect people to spirit, because that's what does all the healing. God is what does all the healing. Now, it doesn't mean we don't do anything for ourselves, but I mean, it's the connection, it's the voice, it's the communication that directs us to the path that we, if we're sincerely asking, will be directed towards. And at that point, I could be opened up. And so I began a study, like I said, even before I became a homeopath, a study of what the heck is going on this planet? Who's really running it? Who appears to be in charge? Who's deceiving me? Who deceived me and lied to me about medicine?
Right.
And that led me to read just so many books on the history of medicine that I'd never heard of, like Divided Legacy by Harris Coulter, with these volumes thick books about the attack on homeopathic medicine by allopathic doctors or pharmaceutical
Mm-hmm.
medicine. And the origin of that, going back to 1910, we have the two brothers, Abraham and Simon Flexner, that seemingly nobody in America has ever heard of. Even today,
Oh,
as I
right.
talk about this, that we hear about the Wright brothers. Oh, yeah. You ask people about what two brothers in America made the biggest impact on the 20th century in the world. And everyone would say, well, it's the Wright brothers, Orville and Wilbur. No, it's Abraham and Simon Flexner. How? What? What do you mean? I never heard of them.
Mm-hmm.
And they were hired to publish, study, or let's say it was basically a preordained commission report by the Carnegie and Rockefeller foundations to establish one form of medical education above all others and basically eliminate the teachings of any others that would be competition
Mm-hmm.
to this emerging field of patent petrochemical medicines. This is the oil-based medicines of the 20th, now 21st century that we know of as, your medical doctor, licensed at DO or even licensed ND, coming from an allopathic naturopathic school. They can actually write you a prescription for a toxic poison to suppress a symptom that you have, as if it were the reason you had the symptom was a lack of that toxic poison. It's absurd, right? When you think about it, it's like, whoa, that makes no sense. But I had no idea, because that's just that's what doctors do, man. That's the medicine. That's the magic. And I had, when I was learning of homeopathy, I was like, oh my gosh. Then I learned of Samuel Hahnemann out of Germany, who was a physician of his day, who said the medicines we have, like mercury, all these things that they were doing, were worse than the diseases or symptoms that were coming to them. And they were as likely to kill the patient,
Mm-hmm.
200 plus years ago. I'm like, not much has changed. It's just gotten more sophisticated, better PR, and that kind of thing. So that history was a journey for me. Again, grounded in the spirit, so I could listen to the voice of God directing me. Here's what you need to see. Here's what you need to read. Here's what you need to look at. And then finding a balance when you find out not only was I lied to about medicine and healing, but just about every aspect of the physical planet that we're on. We were lied to and manipulated to believe that we are powerless unless we
Mm-hmm.
go to the go-betweens, the authorities, the authoritarians in medicine and science and this and that. And it doesn't mean that there aren't good people in those arenas, but by and large, there's a system that has been designed to pull the wool over our eyes, to
Right.
have us live in an illusion where we're disempowered because we're disconnected from God. Which, I've said this about allopathic medicine. It's not that it's wrong everywhere. There's a valid reason to see an allopath, particularly when it comes to surgical interventions. If you've been hit by a bus, there's amazing, amazing things that they can do.
Mm-hmm.
But for the largest part of what modern medicine has done, it's devoid of spirit. It's disconnected from the source of life itself. And it looks at us as just machines, soulless machines. And that manifesting of atheism, whether they acknowledge it or not, is something that has destroyed the integrity of what they called a noble profession, right? The medical profession, the healing profession. The healing arts truly are a noble profession in that context of connection to spirit. But that's the body, mind, spirit. That's more of the, what would we call it? The vitalistic view of the body, which is encompassed in homeopathy, true origin of naturopathy as well, chiropractic, right? Even osteopathy that has been engulfed and devoured by allopathic medicine, medical doctoring. But there's that essence of the view of the body as spirit, imbued with life by spirit. And yes, it's physical too. But when we divorce ourselves from that, as they have in allopathic training, that was part of the Flexner report as well, to focus not on mind and spirit so much as chemical or chemistry. How do we alter the chemistry of a physical machine, so to speak? And
Yeah.
it's like it's godless in that sense. And that's where they went wrong. And of course, that Flexner report established which medical schools would be considered legitimate, which would be funded moving forward. And it worked toward the middle of the 20th century to eliminate all competition. And so to find homeopaths in the middle of the 20th century was already hard to do. And when I went to Emory University in Atlanta, I found out that they were teaching on the medical curriculum at that medical school, Emory University. On the medical curriculum up until about 1949, they had homeopathy still on the curriculum. And it's like, whoa, I went to that school. I had no idea until after I graduated. Look back, I'm like, homeopathy was a mainstay of the history of medicine in America? Yeah, as well as other forms of eclectic herbalism, chiropractic, naturopathy, etc. All of those things that we look back in the early 20th century, they were successful at addressing the big pandemics, the big scaries, even the 1918 Spanish flu, as they call it. And even today in India, we're finding now that over the past year or so that so-called COVID has been manifesting, homeopaths in India, which is a mainstay, they have homeopathic hospitals still in India, were so successful in addressing this that there was literally nobody dying of COVID.
Yeah.
And now as this thing is manifesting again, as they've introduced these experimental injections, they're now trying to shut down and limit the access to homeopathic hospitals, stop them from having oxygen, even delivering oxygen to patients in those hospitals, so that they can show that the homeopathic hospitals are just as bad, or in their sense, their allopathic hospitals are just as good or better, right? By denying, the normal things that you would have in a hospital setting to help triage and help somebody that's near death's door survive and then come back. So that battle is not ended. In 1910 didn't end the battle. It just started it, and it went rolling around the world to where a lot of the world was rooted in natural medicine, if you will, or traditional healing, has lost its way, lost connection to its past. I traveled to West Africa a couple of times, on spiritual missions, but also to meet and speak with the healthcare providers or the doctors there. And I told them to throw out the medicine of the white man. I did. I'm like, this white guy from, America coming to them is like, what? They never hear that. It's all about, we are the smart ones. We're coming to save you from your primitive ways. I'm like, no. Go back to the medicine of your ancestry. Go back and save the medicines in the bush, the medicines of creation. This is what God gave us for healing, and save that tradition, because you can help save all of us that have abandoned it. And they were shocked, but at the same time, somewhat appreciative of like, oh, somebody actually acknowledges that we have a lineage of tradition in natural healing, as we do, even though America is a younger culture as a country. Right. We still are rooted in natural medicine in the history. But what was it Benjamin Rush was credited with saying, a signer to the Declaration of Independence and physician to George Washington? It was quoted basically, I'm paraphrased, I wasn't there to my knowledge, but he said, unless we put medical freedom into the Constitution, a time will come when medicine will organize into an undercover dictatorship and restrict the art of healing to one class of men and deny equal privileges, I would say rights, to others. And, all such laws like that would be un-American and despotic. And, here he was prophetic in what we're witnessing, what we're dealing with an allopathic domination, to the point where the state-sanctioned religion, in violation of our Constitution, is modern medicine, the medical monopoly, or the Church of Pharmaceutical Mysticism. So that's a long way of tapping a little bit of history into there to give hopefully a broader perspective for people.
Well, I think it was a great one, because people don't know the Flexner report. They don't understand how, I love the term alternative treatment or alternative medicine, as if we're the new guys, right? Like as if homeopathy is new, or, herbs are new. They've been here since the creation. So we're not the new guys. We were the people that were always here. What is new is this allopathic acute care model that's trying to treat chronic conditions, which it was never set up for. And, you talk about pharmaceuticals. Jamie always puts into his slide deck, 70% of the world's pharmaceuticals is consumed by 5% of the people. And guess where those 5% of the people live?
We're number one.
We're the
number
United
one.
States.
I mean,
We
number one drug
consume
takers.
70% of the pharmaceuticals in this country, of all the pharmaceuticals in the world. I think that's outstandingly horrifying.
It's embarrassing. We're the United States
embarrassing.
of drug America. I've said this for years. It's like,
And we're supposed to be the most modern medical practice. I mean, we're just drug addicts. That's what we are. Like, we're just drug addicts.
I remember, the propagandizing against so-called street drugs, right? I say it this way because, these were public service announcements, taxpayer funding. And, there was a commercial that said, "This is your brain." It had an egg. This is your brain on drugs.
That.
Crack sizzling in a pan.
Or the guy in the little vial running around.
Yeah.
I work more so I can take more Coke, so I can work more. That's just so that I can make more money.
But they didn't include the most dangerous drugs. And this is not an endorsement of street drugs, you understand, but I'm just saying they wanted you on the street. Well, no, they wanted you on the official drugs that were sanctioned by the Fear and Death Administration, the FDA. And so the propagandizing was all about the drugs on the street, but completely ignoring the third leading cause of death in America, the pharmaceutical drugs properly prescribed, administered, and ingested. And arguably the first leading cause of death, as I say, because when you begin to look at heart disease and cancer, number 1 and 2, usually neck and neck, the things that allopathic physicians do in terms of poisoning their patient population along the way are the key contributing factors, among many, but key to heart disease and cancer. So arguably allopathic medicine has become the number 1 leading cause of death outside of, where they shine and where it's appropriate, emergency trauma triage, although they've triaged people to death too in terms of COVID with ventilators. So it's not all, I'm not dismissing everything by acknowledging in one area that they do have legitimacy.
Yeah. And I think, we're at this point in time in life where we need to take the indoctrination only works if you take out all of the spiritual, right? Get God out of here, because we can't believe in creation and herbs and he provided all things on this earth for us to heal and be well. Nope, can't do that. Boot it, right? And that he doesn't exist. That's the second thing. And yesterday I actually did a post and I talked about Spencer, who won the Nobel Peace Prize for saying all things exist in 5 categories, right? It was, now I have to recall, time, force, action, space, and matter. All things can be categorized there. And I was like, well, Genesis 1:1, right? In the beginning, that's time. God, that's force. Created, that's action. The heavens, that's space. And the earth, that's matter. So there's your 5. He said it first. So we can't use science, right? It doesn't prove anything. What it does is follow creation. And so if we use it that way and use it appropriately, we know that alternative medicine or the original medicine is actually the pathway that we can use to get back to what God created. And so the indoctrination happened there. Don't worry about God. He doesn't exist. He's not real. You don't need him. You're just this physical being. Here's some things. And you don't want to suffer. So we're going to suppress your symptoms. And people went with it because it was quick. And we love this whole instant gratification. My first aha moment, and I knew about the Flexner report. I knew about, vaccines. I had always kind of been on that path. But I remember the very first episodes of The Truth About Cancer. And and I remember going to the Holocaust Museum in my area. I think it's in DC, when I was probably in, 8th or 9th grade. And I remember standing in front of all of those shoes, because they have them all bronzed, of these little tiny children's shoes. I remember just feeling sick to my stomach of oh my gosh, how could this happen? Why would one guy do this, right? Didn't have the whole story. And then fast forward years later, right, there I am watching The Truth About Cancer and learning about Bayer and the experimental, the gassing of them and what they did and how that mustard gas became part of chemotherapy. And I was like, what just happened to my world? That was my first, oh my gosh, how did we get here? And people don't know that. They don't know this stuff because they don't tell you this stuff in history.
No, there's a lot more to the story. Of course, we can go into many different trails and pathways. In fact, what about medical insurance? This idea that, I see a comment here from Krista talking about massage therapy is awesome. Yeah. Human touch is important. It's about the spirit flowing through one another. That's part of healing, even being with somebody and listening to them. But
that's why we're to lay hands.
Right. And nurses used to have that, freedom to go in and with patients, and there was touch. And it was such a part, and I'm getting chills as I'm talking about this because it's like it's lost. Now, of course, they've even made touching and being in proximity with one another a crime, right? This is the thing. How nefarious, how Luciferian is this agenda to fear the virus, fear COVID, all of that, to distance us from one another, and then, of course, distinctly destroy the capacity that we have for healing by being in proximity or even in touching, one another, being in that way. Hugging, people talk, I finally hugged somebody the first time in a year. I mean, it's like, what a crime the past year has been, plus to do that. But even the idea of insurance is like, well, insurance won't cover that, or won't cover this, or won't cover homeopathy. But how did we get this idea that insurance was an appropriate thing for, everyday ailments and care and concepts? Now, we can go back to even more ancient concepts of the village healer, so to speak, or the medicine man or the medicine woman, in ancient Chinese cultures, and maybe it still exists in far-flung regions of China outside of communism, because this is not an advocation of modern government in that sense.
Right.
You look at the healers of a village, or a healer of a village that was, cared for, they didn't want for anything because they were so valuable. But then again, there were elements of, if people were sick in that community, compensation was not happening for that healer until people were well. So the motivation for the healer is, of course, wellness, keeping everybody well, as opposed to our system now, which turns that upside down. When do doctors get paid? If they get paid, but through a third party, only when you're managing sickness. You got to keep people coming, keep them sick. And that's where profit happens in that system. It completely reversed, a movement toward health and healing and wellness to one that has incentivized disease and disease management, creation and management. And then we get into the insurance schemes, which are third-party payers, which is part of a concept in law called admiralty, right? The law of the seas, where you pool your resources together. You go on a ship, or you put goods into a ship, and like, what if the ship is lost? Can we insure against those losses? So you'd pool your resources, and in case of disaster, an unexpected catastrophe happens, that you would be made whole again, or some kind of compensation. And that concept is sound really only for the unexpected catastrophes, whereas now it's applied for every little thing. Now, how did that also become part of our culture? We look at the tax code in America as what do you call social engineering, right? There was a time in the early part of the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. That was another disaster 3 years after the Flexner Report of 1910, to establish a bank, a federal or national bank, that certainly violated the Constitution, and we were warned against it by many of our founding fathers. And that bank connected to the International Monetary Fund and World Bank. The Federal Reserve is neither federal nor has any reserves. We've talked, G. Edward Griffin even appeared on a number of the episodes of Truth About Cancer, talking about a world without cancer, his discussion of amygdala, the Laetrile, right, vitamin B17. But he also wrote The Creature from Jekyll Island. How does this roll in? Because it's all about economics, ultimately. What was the Flexner Report? Not about improving healthcare in America. It was about establishing a medical monopoly, an economic monopoly, a domination over all forms of healing that pre-existed it, and funneling everybody in like chutes for cattle to get slaughtered or branded, in a sense. And then we are at this point in time where we perceive medicine as legitimate, and everything else that's alternative is somehow less than, or not legitimate at all, or quackery, on and on it goes. Right. And so we look at the insurance idea. Where did we get this idea? One of my other semi-famous quotes is, the most dangerous thing you can have in America is really good medical insurance.
That was Joe's favorite quote from the seminar.
Yeah.
I think he's going to make a t-shirt for you.
Oh, that'd be awesome. We love it. But it really is true. And even people that are like, everybody should have insurance, kind of look and think and go, wait a second, because I went to Canada and I lectured in Canada like 4 years in a row at the Total Health Conference in Toronto. And I would speak about this issue with the Canadians. I'm like, do you like your medical system? Oh, yeah, it's way better than the American system. You guys are mean and cruel and nasty. We have a single payer system, socialized medicine. I'm like, the people coming to this natural health conference obviously are, focused more on natural healing things. And I said, so how often do you use that system that you think is so great? And they would often say, well, no, I would never use it. I mean, all it does is cover, vaccines and drugs. I don't do that. I'm like, but you're applauding that because it provides people that don't know better with toxic poison. Oh gosh, I never thought about that. So there's this superficial thought of, we're so nice. I'm not bashing Canadians. I love Canada. I mean, I love the people there. But the point is that system is part of that same medical monopoly that exists in a minorly different way in America, where the semi-private or government private partnerships of insurance schemes are doing the same darn thing, relegating the monetary support for only one form or one system, like Flexner Report set up. And to talk about the tax code and social engineering, there was a time where, the income tax was like 90% over a certain level, and they're like, dude, no one's going to come work for us and get 90% of their money taken away. So this is where corporations got the idea of providing benefits to their employees. It's like, well, if we can't pay you that much, they'll just take it away. Let's offer you perks. Let's give you health insurance. Let's give you and this health insurance scheme also funneled into Rockefeller Carnegie ideals of, now we can jack the prices up because the prices are not being impacted. You're not pulling out of your pocket and paying the doctor anymore. You're relying on a third-party payer that has all the money in the world because you give them a premium, or your company is paying that premium for you because it's a perk and it's not being taxed in the same way they would take your money if they were paying directly to you. You follow me? This is an important part of understanding how we got here. It wasn't by accident. And so the drug industry benefited greatly by these new perks being created. And so it became an expectation that when you went to work for somebody, hey, how's the healthcare? What's that? And that became the competitive advantage. And that sort of became endemic to a new culture of allopathic medicine, or the medical monopoly. And then the rising prices, because it wasn't coming out of people's pockets so much as the third-party scheme or government schemes that were now playing in as the dawn of Medicare and Medicaid, third-party payers. Under Nixon, I think that was it wasn't the PPOs. What were they called? I forget.
I can't remember.
These are old names that just escape me right now. But these were basically different forms of, how do we pool this money and give it to the drug industry, the medical industry, the allopathic monopoly. And that's what it was. Now, third-party payers, insurance companies, are the directors of the care, because the doctors, even if they want to do right by the patient, have to get approval from those third-party payers, those interveners in a formerly sacred relationship. You understand? They talk about the doctor-patient relationship is sacred. Anybody heard that? That used to be true. When we acknowledge spiritual relationships in healing, sacred, right. Yes. And that was destroyed, ripped out by the third-party government, private interveners that said, now there's no sacred relationship. It's our bottom line, and we're going to tell you what you can or can't do, what treatment is legitimate or not. And now the doctors were trapped too. Even if they wanted to do right, they're like, well, if I do that, not only will I not be paid, and you don't have the money to pay me because of the system that's set up, I will be threatened with loss of licensure. They will take my license away as a doctor. Now, licensure is another aspect that has been sold, a false bill of goods.
That's the worst thing. Yeah, it's the worst thing to be licensed in anything, because once you're licensed, there's rules and laws that get applied to you. And everybody has always sought out, especially in natural health, they wanted to be licensed. I'm like, as soon as you're licensed, you are bound. You are bound. And you know what? The whole thing of the government controlling. So I'm going to address Krista's comment, because I know her. She is a massage therapist in my area. And what was it? Back in 2006, maybe a little bit later, the Congress came in and said, well, all massage therapists have to be licensed now. And this was in the state of Pennsylvania. And because of that, we get to say who's qualified and who's not, although we don't know you and we don't know your educational background. So you had to have so many things to get grandfathered, and then you had to take a test, right? So at the time, I have a degree in exercise and sports science. So basically I was, I know anatomy, kinesiology, I know all the muscles, I know the, tendons, ligaments, all of that stuff. And I was doing active personal training and working in a physical therapy office for PT. And I had taken a training under Claire Davies, which was trigger point therapy. So from his daughter, because he had passed by that time. But it was all about antagonistic muscle interaction and, release techniques and all this stuff. So I used that every single day, like in my personal training and in my PT, because there were no regulations at the time. I had a bachelor's of science in that particular field. Well, all of a sudden, Congress comes in and says, nope, you can't do that anymore, because somehow insurance didn't want to cover somebody like me who wasn't licensed, but somebody, and this is not a crack on people that go to massage school, no offense, but I had 4 years of undergraduate study plus a minor in nutrition, and then became a naturopathic doctor. And they were telling me that I couldn't do it anymore, where somebody that had 10 months of training was more qualified than I was. So I was like, hold the phone. So I thought, I'm not taking your test. Like, forget you. I'm not going to do it. So you find different ways to incorporate it. Although insurance wouldn't pay for it, I didn't care. I was like, all right, pay me cash. Like, I don't care, So it's really difficult for people to understand what licensing does. It doesn't make you smarter just because you have a license. I usually tell people, you don't know if your doctor finished first in his class or last, but he still gets to call himself doctor, So you might have the dumb guy in the classroom, and just because he passed his boards by 1 point, he gets to call himself doctor. It doesn't make him a good doctor. And because he has a license doesn't make him know more things than somebody who doesn't. My comparative analysis is how many hours of nutritional training does he have? Does he know vitamins, minerals, macros, like all of that stuff? They don't get that training, yet they're supposed to be superior in health than someone like me who has hundreds of hours of training.
Yeah, the perception of licensure is completely wrong. I mean, the licensure is to establish and protect an economic monopoly. It is not to provide guarantee of excellence, as you point out.
Right.
It protects the mediocre and the worst doctors' licensure in many cases.
Pretty much.
The idea of licensure is to subject yourself to a bunch of morons who have no earthly idea what it means to be a healer, much less heal. And basically, again, it's an economic monopoly established by government, by fiat, and then destroys those who have independent critical thinking skills, who want to do better than the standard, so to speak, who want to innovate. Licensure prevents innovation. We do not need licensure. Now, there's legitimate ways to certify, board certifications, things like that, that you can establish credentials via achieving certain things. But licensure is not about protecting the public. It's about protecting economic monopolies. And I'm so sorry massage therapists fell prey to that as well. Some naturopaths, chiropractors, of course, they all wanted to be like doctors that were licensed. And now they're paying the price. It's not pretty. And those that lose their licenses, it's kind of a bummer at first, but then they say, well, I gained my freedom again. I'm free. Emancipation. How do you say that? Emancipation? I'm emancipated, right? Anyway, but that's it. Freedom is not compatible with licensure.
Right. And you really only need a license if you want to work in the big system of whatever that system is, right? If you want to follow the system. And, we work with a lot of doctors with nutraceuticals. And, these doctors are very transparent. And they say, like, if I recommend a nutraceutical, I could lose my license. Like, I can't do that.
How does it feel to be on a leash, doc?
Right. Huh? And additionally, if I don't prescribe these 3 medications for this particular type of patient that has X or Y diagnoses, I don't get my full reimbursement. And to a doctor that has numerous clinics or a large staff, if he's not or she's not, prescribing this trifecta, let's say it's for a diabetic, right? Metformin, a statin drug, and blood pressure, then that doctor doesn't get a full reimbursement for that patient. And so do that 100 times, do that 200 times, and that could equate $500 to $1 million to $2, $3, $4 million for that clinic. Now, how are you going to pay your staff? How are you going to grow your practice? How are you going to help more people if you don't have enough people to help them?
It's not.
And so they're hamstringed. Yeah. So they can't even be doctors.
No, they're slaves to a system that poisons people for profit, that has an ideal, if you can call it an ideal, that we can poison you back to health, which is so absurd. It's like, you graduated medical school and that's what you do. That's what I concluded before I got there. I'm like, I'm going to poison people back to health. That didn't work for me. It's not going to work for anybody else. I'm not going to do that. Now, it dashed my dreams of becoming a doctor because it was the only form of doctoring I knew growing up.
Yeah, same.
I mean, I've told this story. I knew about faith healing, that concept. Of course, you can read about it, in the Bible. But my aunt, my mom's sister, she was young, beautiful, married to a wealthy man, and got in a car accident and disfigured her face a little bit. She lost sight in one eye. She came out of that drastic, life-threatening event and suddenly found she had this ability to lay hands, and spirit would move through her and help people to heal. So I understood that there was more to life than just physical, but that was still, it was sort of like, oh, okay, that's that thing on the side. That's pretty cool, pretty weird. I don't know, but pretty cool.
Right.
And so, learning about the vitalistic forms of medicine available to us, and it's not necessarily medicine that you can touch. It's medicine, energy. It's good medicine. Healing is about everything. The medicine man, when they talk about good medicine in Native American language, it doesn't even mean a substance necessarily. There's so
Right.
much more that we are not taught because we are in a collectivist, let's say, molecular reductionist view of the world. And again, it's devoid of spirit. We're all
It is.
machines. And that's where again, it went wrong. And then everything else that manifested from it that we expect is like, well, this is normal. No, this is not healthy normal. It might become
No.
normal, but it's a diseased normal
It
that we're
might
at.
be
We're
the
gonna
accepted norm, but it's not normal, just like this whole past year, right?
Mhm.
The new normal wasn't acceptable to me. I didn't participate.
Look, even the
So,
old normal was rough, right? When we
right.
started, look, I started learning about things as a homeopath. I'm like, women have these menstrual cycles that they call normal, but they're not healthy normal. They're aberrant.
Correct.
Women bleeding for a week at a time profusely as if they got injured, as opposed to shedding the monocellular lining of the uterus if there's no pregnancy taking place. I mean, you go back 100 years to find out what a normal menstrual period was in a healthy woman. Just as an example of like how far we strayed, what we expect now is not only that, but breakthrough bleeding at ovulation. We're
Or
hearing more of that happen.
accepted treatment of children who have abnormal cycles of
Mhm.
putting a child on
And
birth
birth control.
control.
Yeah, further
You're
manipulation.
manipulating hormones at 12, 13 years old. I mean, to me, that's child abuse. Like,
It
what am I
is.
going to put like a 12-year-old boy on steroids? What's the difference?
Yeah.
Let's put them on some testo. Let's just, get them all buffed up. But we'll do that to girls and call it medicine.
Yeah.
And, I keep going back to all week long, I've been woken up with Matthew 10:33, where it's like, if you deny me here before man, I'll deny you before the Father. And him saying, people were saying, but I prophesied in your name. I cast it out in your name. But they're not abiding in him, right? What about the medical profession or even pastors during this time who shut their church doors, who lived in massive fear of this thing? I mean, aren't they denying what he did on that cross? I mean, let's just be real, right? So that passage can go a long way. It's not just for people that are false prophets, right? I mean, you deny anything that is the truth in that book, then it's false prophecy. So it's not just restricted to one way of denying it, and that's the whole thing. And we've become so good at taking God out of everything, out of our schools, out of the lives of our children, that we are just embracing this fear. We're afraid to die. We're afraid to get sick. We're afraid not to have good health insurance. We're afraid to stand up and look different. We're afraid to fight back against the powers that be because we might get in trouble. We might lose our license. We're afraid not to take the jab because we want to go to a certain school, rather than saying like, oh, maybe I shouldn't take that because it might kill me, cause infertility, whatever all the things are, because it's experimental and just truly, I don't know yet what it's going to do. But for an education that these people are actually paying for, they have a experimental medical procedure needed to be done to their body in order to go spend their money there. Does that make sense to you? Like, how did this get so backwards? How did we get here?
Yeah, we've lost our way, of course, and that which we value is shallow, hollow, a pale reflection of what's really important, if that. The connection to spirit. As I said, if you're in the healing arts or profession, whether you're considered a doctor or not, my view of that is clear that your role is to reconnect people to the spirit, to divine spirit, to the source of all healing. Now, granted, you have, like, I wasn't trained to do that. I don't know what medical school trains that anymore, but the reality is all of the things that you do learn that could be of help are, I would say, secondary to the spirit directing you in any given moment, because there are always going to be unique needs that can only be responded to appropriately if we are in that present moment, as opposed to being like robots and just following, these atheistic orders of look at the machine, fix the machine. It's just the machine. And as I said, there are skills in that regard when we talk surgical interventions, but I'm talking about every form of healing, every form, from allopathic to holistic and everything in between. When we get back to that God-centered focus, and I know everybody perceives it, they define it differently. Again, that's the the uniqueness, the freedom we've been granted by God. So whatever you call, I'm not here to tell people what to do or how to say or how to, but the connection is it, and how you live is the example for others to then duplicate what you've done or even do greater, right? And I think, all things I've done, you can do great. That kind of concept of being the example for others and define what are their special gifts, talents, what is their mission? Why are you here? And not everybody has to be an overt healer with hanging a shingle, because the very act of, hugging somebody, looking in the eye and deeply listening to something that they have to say is a healing event. It's a miraculous spiritual connection, a communion of some kind. And so all life is, as they say, either all life is a miracle or none of it is. Which path are you going to go down? Which viewpoint of the world are you going to take?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the things that I wanted to talk about was you had touched a little bit on terrain and germ theory. I mean, haven't we disproven this germ theory? Didn't we destroy it? So why is that model still being taught in medical schools? And I mean, the whole world. If I see one more bottle of hand sanitizer, I might scream.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know.
Well, profitability of that allopathic model depends upon fear. It does. Obviously they ratcheted it up to new levels in the last year, but it's always been a fear-based paradigm, if you can call it that. It's one that subjects you to a view of the world as you are a victim of what happens to you by accident. It's like you have no control over it. You have no power. Your immune system, what's that? Forget it. Just pay it lip service, but don't really consider that it was given to you by God to protect you in cases of challenge and times. And so it's a random act of victimhood as a consciousness. It's a victim state of consciousness. I think it's very spiritually immature, honestly, Tracy. And I know people can get offended by that.
Well, but they can get offended.
There's spiritual immaturity in this view that we are just, randomly running around and randomly getting sick, and it's our genetic bad luck. It's like, man, it is so far from how God created this place. And so to move from that fear-based viewpoint means to eliminate the control and the power that those would want to exert over you. It completely, it just unplugs.
And also denying your flesh, right? Yeah. And having accountability for your own walk here. Exactly. And that's hard because, that people love their stuff. They love all their stuff, whether it's food stuff or alcohol stuff or drug stuff or just stuff, and we'd have to deny ourselves certain things in order to gain health. I mean, one of the biggest things that I noticed, Robert, was when you came to speak, you were very adamant about the fact that you work really hard at taking care of yourself. And even when you travel or go somewhere, you're not going to not do that. And so you were just kind of like, hey, if there isn't organic places around to eat or whatever, I'll just fast. And I was like, okay. I was like, we don't want you to starve. So let's try to figure this out. So then Michelle zipped in, right?
She was amazing.
And so she made all organic food and
such a beautiful gift.
For really 3 days. It was, for the duration that you were there, because number one, your body needed nutrition and fuel for what you were doing. And for us not to do that for you would have just been, completely.
I was so well nourished but part of that perspective is your value system, right?
You didn't settle. So I really appreciated that.
And I believe, like I said, that's a great example of God meeting you halfway or all the way, right? If you're willing to compromise on your values and say, well, this time my temple can be desecrated, right? When you perceive that putting in something less than ideal for your body is, it's like, do I love myself enough to poison my? Wait, no, that makes no sense. I love myself enough to not poison myself. And of course we did in ignorance. My mom and dad didn't know, raised on the 4 food groups, pizza, hot dogs, Coca-Cola, and potato chips, all chemically grown and processed, on and on it goes. And then of course, going to doctors who never talk to you about their diet. And they say, well, here's a drug. So we have been programmed away from a belief that we living in a sacred temple, or this body that we've been given while we're here,
Mm-hmm.
and that we should care for it. We sort of talk about it. We're like, you hear the car analogies. Would you put dirty fuel in your really nice car? And like, oh, of course not. Well, why would you put that garbage food? Well, yeah, they laugh and they go, yeah, I know. But they really don't take it that seriously. Now,
But they love their car more than their body.
Sure. But they also maybe not perceive. They hear you, but they don't perceive the reality of what you put into your body does matter and does impact, because we all have various strengths and weaknesses. That's true. That's the uniqueness
Mm-hmm.
of our body and what we're here to do and experience. So I happen to have a body that was vulnerable, call it a canary in the coal mine of Generation X, where I got to experience the old age diseases almost from the get-go. All the ailments and illnesses that I had are commonplace in the millennial and post-millennial generation. Like, it's very rare to find a kid that doesn't have one chronic disease or ailment or illness at all. Just one. Just find one that doesn't have one, much less multiples. Now, of course, we talk about the vaccination issue and so many other things that have caused a generational even decline in the health of young people. I happen to get that, like, again, earlier than most. Now, that allowed me, and I look back as I'm cursing at God. God, why did you do this to me? Why did I suffer in my childhood? I couldn't breathe, and on and on.
Mm-hmm.
And then you look and you go, oh my gosh, it was the greatest gift in the world. Had I not experienced that, I could not have been motivated to learn what I learned, to be able to communicate what I communicate today, to help people find that path back to not only health and healing physically, but all the other things that I've learned. And so I say, thank you, God, for allowing me to suffer the way I did. Or in another sense, God loves me enough to allow me to suffer, to learn the things I needed to learn, to do the things that I'm here to do. And so that at a certain point, you switch your whole view about suffering and you go, I'm not like endorsing and embracing, I wish everybody would suffer like me. That's not my point in saying this. But that our suffering in our journey is a gift, if we look at it that way, to really align with our mission, our purpose, our spirit here while we're here. And so that when tough stuff happens, when so-called bad things happen to good people, you say, I'm a good person, why is this happening to me? And I look at it and I think there's a gift here somewhere that I am being given.
It's an equipping. It's an equipping
that I need to really see. And so even if I don't know it yet, I look to try and be grateful for everything, not just the awesome, good stuff, the stuff that really sucks. You're like, and now you learn enough. It's like, well, God wouldn't throw that at me if it wasn't going to ultimately help me. Now, it also, we participate in that too by thinking wrong, behaving wrong. And I don't think of it so much as punishment, but as a gift to learn. The opportunity, because we have free will, free choice, agency, that kind of is one of the greatest gifts. Some people say it's the greatest curse. I think it's the greatest gift, because then
it's the discipline and correction,
and we come back to God by choice.
That's right.
And not by force or deception or coercion, but because we choose to. That's what it means to be the chosen people.
Yes. And that's why we can cry out to be, Abba Father. I mean, that term means daddy. Like, he wants us to cry out to him. He wants us to turn to him. And sometimes you have to hit your knees in order to have the best view, and especially if you're a strong-willed person, or you think you can do it all in your own power. Like, I got this, I can go out and I can do it. And that's why, it's like, don't grow weary, turn your eyes back, and he'll direct you. Yeah. And the best part of it is if you could see it in the equipping. Like, if you have that discernment to be like, all right, I'm in a thing right now. Like, this is happening. It's not comfortable, but I know what's happening. I know that God's allowing this to happen so that I can be refined and purified and polished, so that initially, I can do a thing.
Tracy, and tell me what you think about it. It initially comes through faith. You have faith. You got to have faith. It's like, I got to get through this. I need faith to get through it. At a certain point in time, you have enough of these experiences. I don't know if this is sacrilegious, but I don't even think you need faith anymore. The experience has been so indelibly marked into your very core existence. What do I have to be faithful for? Because I know that I'm always with God and God's got me. And so it's like you live through a different level of experience. And I'm not saying faith is bad, because it gets you there. But at a certain point, how many experiences do you need to know that you don't need to doubt? Does that make sense? Maybe you can nuance what I'm trying to say here.
Well, I mean, the Jews wandered around for 40 years doubting, and they had a cloud that followed them. They struck a rock. There was water. I mean, they had all the evidence of God's existence, but we don't need evidence, right? I mean, the faith faith applied is trust. You have to trust, so that we have this faith, and then the evidence of faith is trust. You trust in the Lord with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind.
Yeah.
And that faith is first. And we're all given a measure of faith. That's in the Bible. But the trust that goes along with it can grow through experience, through equipping, through the loving discipline. And that's, he's a good father, right? Let's just talk about that. What good father doesn't discipline their child? What good father doesn't give a consequence? What good father doesn't give a little bit of advice to say, hey, when you see this, you got to have these eyes. Have the eyes to see and the ears to hear. Don't be stupid. Don't be following. If your friends jump off a bridge, would you jump off too? I mean, how many times did you hear that, right? From your father, probably, right?
Yeah.
So that's how God disciplines. He disciplines us like he loves us. Not that he hates us, that he loves us. And so when we hear wrath, like the wrath of God, that's discipline of the Lord. It doesn't mean because he hates us. It's because he's so angry at what the enemy is trying to lie to us. And, I always tell my kids, like, I need to train you up in the ways of God so you don't depart from it. But remember, the enemy's trying to train you up too. So you can go this way or this way. You have a choice, like you say. And if you know his voice and you trust him, you will choose God every time because you trust him. That is the measure of faith applied, is trust.
Beautifully said. I knew you could say it better. That was awesome.
No, it wasn't better. It was just, that's the glory of how God brings us all together, is that iron sharpens iron. And it's why we have to come together as practitioners, as natural, practitioners come together, even allopath, everyone come together in trust, have faith in God and Spirit, right? The Holy Spirit, let him lead you, so that we can all walk the same path. I mean, the one thing that the whole allopathic indoctrination pathway has together, they all say the same thing over and over again to make you believe it. They all drive in one direction. It's like the best marketing plan ever put together. I always say, like, Satan is a great marketer.
Yeah.
We need to get better. We need to get better at driving one direction. And there's so much division even between us because we don't understand the word of God applied in everybody's life, and that we're on different paths, that we're on different purposes here. It looks different in my life as it does yours, Robert, but it doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. So it just means you're growing. And, God's equipping you. So I can't make that go faster for you, and you can't make it go faster for me. So I just think that people need to turn back to, trust in God, keep your eyes up, stop trusting man and what they say, and abide in him. When he says, fear not, worry not, he means it. That's a literal scripture. Fear not, worry not, worry
let the Spirit
today.
guide you. I mean, how
That's
many
right.
times you can be tested or you can test it and it will come through. And that's why I'm saying that transition from just faith to, the works, the acts, and as you said, to trust. And it's like, again, I'm not speaking ill of faith. I'm just saying that that's a step along the way. At a certain point, you realize, my gosh, that got me here. But now why would I ever doubt this? Why would I ever doubt this? That I'm cared for and I'm loved. And, that's the journey. And all of the 2x4s that they had were loving 2x4s to get us back on by choice, to let you learn, the hard way. Sometimes we have to let our kids learn the hard way. They have to, scuff their knee, or they touch the hot stove once, and hopefully that's indelibly remembered for the rest of their existence. That's how it was designed to happen. And it doesn't mean we don't have compassion and we don't love, but my suffering, had somebody just miraculously taken away, like I prayed, please God, take it away. I'll take a lightning bolt. What would I have learned from that?
That's right.
Everybody pray for lightning. Like, well, no, that's not a good thought.
And what if he would have healed you right there, right? What relationship would you have had? What lessons would you have learned if it was like instant? Then you would have no experience to tell somebody else.
No.
And, as for touching the stove, I saw a great quote out there, and I think it was Chris that actually posted it. There's no stop, drop, and roll in hell, just so y'all know. So
that's good.
So I tell my kids, I'm like, there's no stop, drop, and roll there, buddy.
Yeah.
But great stuff. And I hope people that get back to understanding that we have everything we need here. And if we walk in faith and we understand how to use it and apply it to our life, as we abide in Christ, right, then we can have what God's will is for our life, that healing, if we choose him. But if we get on a different path, it's going to be different. And that's what it looks like now. We are down a path in Galatians where everything that is good is now bad and everything bad is now good. It's kind of like it's backwards. Everything's backwards, Robert.
Well, in order to, get to the point where people value what's valuable, they have to lose the things that aren't and realize, well, those weren't really the important things. And so that's a time frame we're witnessing right now. And it's tough, especially, those that are have been through this and see it. And it's like a compassionate mom and dad. You see your kids suffering and struggling. You can't always pick them up and care and do everything for them. Part of their lesson as they mature into adulthood, and then we talk from spiritual immaturity to spiritual maturity, is to recognize and indelibly, let's say wear, or if it becomes part of your being, those lessons that are time immemorial, going back, from the dawn of time to now, that don't change, that are immutable. And that's what, my search was, what are the laws that govern this universe? How do I align myself with them and apply them to help myself? Yes. And of course, help others. And I think the healer's journey is to learn that. And, whether you, again, hang the shingle or not, that's secondary to the fact that everybody is a healer by their very existence, by their very breath, their voice, their actions, and recognize every moment can be a healing moment. And, those moments that aren't are there to teach us about how to be healers in everything that we do. So I'm, always so grateful to connect with you, Tracy. Just, you stimulate such wonderful things to flow through the spirit to allow me to communicate with whoever's ready to hear these messages, and for me to hear them and reinforce them for myself. As I say, the power to heal is yours. When I remind myself every hour of my show, it's not just for everybody to hear, it's for me to hear. Remember, there was a time where you didn't know that. Keep reminding yourself.
That's right.
Living it.
So how can people connect with you every day? Where do they need to go?
All right. Well, just come on over to robertscottbell.com. And if you go to robertscottbell.com/listen, you can watch the show live. You can see the archives. You can hear the show anytime, 24/7, all over the world. When we get to do events together, there's an upcoming events page right now. We got Memorial Day weekend, the Advanced Medicine Conference in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I'm seeing if I can go to the Red Pill Expo the week after in Rapid City, where what's the, I always forget the names, the statue, they carved out of the mountain there.
Now I'm forgetting.
Isn't that funny? I don't know what it is about
Somebody posted in the chat.
It's so silly. But yeah, the opportunity to get together now. South Dakota has remained open. Christy Noem's been good on that. We want to, just like we did for Nutritional Frontiers, that big event on the terrain, which, again, I'm so grateful. I still talk about it, the amazing things that you did, and Michelle and others.
Thank you.
Mount Rushmore. Thank you, I'm like, I don't know. Anyway, but I haven't been, but yeah, the Red Pill Expo is the weekend following Memorial Day weekend. G. Edward Griffin.
What a great name, the Red Pill Expo.
Yeah. So there's some events coming up. Of course, we know the Health Freedom Expo. We're planning to be alive together in, what is it? Tinley Park, outside of Chicago, Illinois, October 2nd and 3rd. So just stay connected, because if we can connect, in the physical as well, it strengthens our resolve, and we can share experiences that we're going through in ways that are better than Zoom, or whatever. We do what we can. We use what we have, but to come together in spirit and prayer and worship and praise, all of these things, again, it doesn't happen necessarily only in the four walls of a church, right? It's like 24/7 is what we're learning to do. And
we are the
dissuaded
church
from it. So coming together the way we do is so amazing. Thank you to Weiner Wellness. Thank you to Jamie and the crew, everybody that's doing such good work there, and you as well, because you're stepping it up in a time where it's desperately needed, and I'm grateful for your service.
Absolutely. Fear not, right? Let's go out like flowing rivers of water. So, all right, guys, have a great day. Robert, thank you for everything you do in the health community. You're a blessing to everybody. So
thank you so much.
All right, guys, connect with him every day on the Robert Scott Bell Show. Go to robertscottbell.com/listen. Correct? We got it. All right, guys, thanks so much. Talk to you soon.